This week on The Futurists, Bronwyn Williams.
The reason we're hanging on to jobs, both at an economic sense, at a national sense, at a planning sense, and at a personal sense, is because we have not come up with a different story that we can believe in.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I am your host, Brett King. This week I am coming to you from Moscow with the South African futurist, Bronwyn Williams. Bronwyn, welcome to The Futurists.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, you've just, you recently published a book called Surviving the AI Apocalypse. And today we did a panel here talking about some of the investment opportunities in the AI space and sort of that vector. But let's start with the book. Tell me a bit about the project itself in terms of, and I apologize, I haven't yet read the book, but I will. How did it get started? How did you decide to write this book?
Well, it was very much a collaboration between myself and my co-author, Sharon Pierce. I'm a professional generalist. She's a professional specialist. She is, in layman's terms, the angel of death that large banks hire to determine who makes the cuts and who does not.
Oh, okay.
So if you are someone who is in a job, in a bank, this is someone you really should be paying attention to. She's going to determine whether your role is actually adding value, not just to shareholders, but to your customers too, or not. So obviously I've been looking at the future of everything, as we do as futurists. So the future of work is one piece that people are constantly asking you to comment on because people are afraid. They're afraid of losing their livelihood. And Sharon is also afraid of that. She's afraid that people don't understand that they're in a position where they really have no bargaining power. And this book was very much written for people who are still in one of those JOBs as a kind of come to Jesus reckoning speech, where we're really encouraging people to honestly assess the value that they're adding and the market's perception of that value. And if the answer is not very much, well, then it's a pretty good time to reevaluate what you're going to be doing next, where that means reskilling, or as we contend, it's not really about skills at all. Yeah. It's rather about the mindset of being able, it sounds cheesy, to adapt, but also really to be able to identify problems that are yet to be solved. And we kind of have a methodology in the book that helps people figure out how to do that. So it's not rocket science. This should be the basics. But what shocks me working in corporates, and Sharon too, is just how few people have really understood the writing is on the wall and you are not equipped for that dog-eat-dog sea out there.
I mean, I sort of put it, every futurist has their sort of ways they explain this, but I talk about there's two kinds of people in the world: those who are using AI to enhance their career, figure out how to, improve their business, all of those things using AI in their daily life. That's the first type of person. And the second type of person is those that are going to be replaced by the first type of person. I'm sure you've heard similar analogies to that. But I found it interesting today. It's actually quite similar. We had Dave Shapiro on a while ago talking about the meaning economy. And I like the way you said that we are going to have work in the future. We're just not going to have jobs. So could you elucidate on that a little bit, please?
Well, work is a much broader category of things. Work can be caring for your family or loving your partner. Work can be digging in the garden. Work can be, of course, providing a service for a client. But jobs are a very defined and very small segment of the world of work. And we've got very confused with that. We've tended to think and conflate that the two are the same. But a job is a very artificial thing. The job is the product of the Industrial Revolution, which is still within almost living memory. We're talking like a couple of generations ago. It's still within the long now that this came about. We've taken it to be for granted as the de facto way to a meaningful, successful life is to get someone to pay you. Yeah. This is a very artificial thing. Paying itself, money is artificial, jobs are artificial, and yet we base our whole economies on things like the employment rate and unemployment rate, and it confuses so much. I'm a South African.
We get so excited that, if the jobs numbers are up or whatever. It's actually, it's interesting. I remember J.P. Rangaswamy, who is a great articulator, based out of the UK, recently retired, but a really nice guy. And I remember him saying to be a good futurist, you have to be a good pastist. You have to understand the past, the history of things. What I find interesting in that sort of conversation is if you look at what we consider employment today and the jobs, as you say, the work stuff, and you are looking at that today, historically, the 40-hour working week is a very, very new feature of humanity.
Artificial.
Right. And so, we think of it as normal today, but people prior to the Industrial Revolution spent the majority of their time just trying to survive, make sure they had enough food to eat and so forth. And so when you look at it in those sort of human timescales, the concept that we have to protect employment is in itself a little bit, not ironic, but it doesn't, from a human perspective,
It's the wrong hill to die on.
Yeah. So I think this is an interesting piece where if we transition to something new, why are we so defensive of, well, we've got to keep jobs for people, we've got to keep paying people, instead of saying, it's just time to transition to something new and let's work out what that's going to be.
Well, here I'm going to wear my futurist hat, which is that.
Well, that's what this is called, the Futurist Show. So please do.
Because the reason we're hanging on to jobs, both at an economic sense, at a national sense, at a planning sense, and at a personal sense, is because we have not come up with a different story that we can believe in. Right. So what moves people is having a vision. I mean, this is even as simple as like your vision is your alarm clock goes off, you've got to be at the conference at a certain time. You've envisaged where you need to be, you know what you need to do in order to get there. And what we've lost at the moment is a vision of what the alternative is. Because our policies, because the way the rewards are distributed in our society are so tied to your job, to your title. People ask you, what do you do when they meet you at a party? Yeah. We don't have another story to build a life around. Yeah. And this is a real tragedy for our generation, perhaps less so for my daughter's generation, because I'm already having conversations with her that life isn't about what job are you going to get when you finish school. It's rather, who are you going to be? What value are you going to add to society? Which is actually a much more fundamentally human conversation. But for many generations presently in the workplace, I mean, all four of them that are kind of competing for space, that was the story you were told. Without that story to hang on to, without a marker to compare your success and your status in life, which is currently so tied to both money and jobs, we don't know what to do. So we've this is where you got the lost future. We don't have a future to look towards, and what a good life could look like. We've lost the imagination there, which is silly because it's so obvious what you could be doing.
So today, when I say, what do you do? And I talked about this in Technosocialism, actually. I said that I'm glad we're having this conversation because I've always wanted a way to sort of validate this thinking with someone who's you've written an entire book on it. But I posited that what AI will do is that in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, when I ask you, what do you do? The difference is your answer will be what you're passionate about, where you feel you're changing the world, because we'll have the tools to do that. Whereas today, it's how are you an economic unit of value in the economy, right?
Exactly, which is such an artificial thing. It's so fundamentally anti-human, and yet the message we hear, the fear-mongering we get is, AI is going to take your job. So I'm like, yes, absolutely, but why is that a bad thing?
Yeah. So tell me a bit more about how the project came to be with the book, how you met Sharon, and how you guys work together. Because I've worked with a few different authors on putting books together, and each time it's been a bit of a different experience.
Oh, absolutely. It can go badly wrong if you're working with the wrong people. In Sharon and my case, our areas of expertise are so different that it becomes complementary. That's the great lessons to society in there too. Work with people who are different to you, and you'll have much more fun than competing with someone who's trading on the same space. She does go deep. I do go much broader. We met through the consulting space. Many of our clients were the same clients, but working in very different ways. Herself working in the sort of hardcore IT and HR transformation, me working much more on the features and strategy piece. But they do connect. They connect around the back because everything is connected. So we really met through being part of the same sort of client circles. And Sharon never written a book before, and she really wanted to do that. So we found a way to marry the message she'd seen with the message that I've seen around this, and the urgency of telling the story now, because of how many people are trapped in, as David Graeber says, these bullshit jobs that pay you just enough money to be comfortable, but don't actually add value to yourself or to anyone else in the world. So we're both kind of passionate about the same story, coming at it from different angles. And we actually wrote this book through literally a series of conversations. We recorded conversations like this
cool.
and used that as basically draft 0.0 of the book, which then had to be obviously written and edited and put together. So we didn't get AI to write the book, but it was in the room with us, listening in a very Socratic kind of method.
Yeah, I mean, I had interviewed, I've had him on the show many times, Kevin J. Anderson, who has written 56 bestsellers. Has over 2 million books in print, which is amazing. But he writes his books dictating on a dictaphone as he's hiking through the Colorado hills, pretty amazing. I didn't even know how, because he's doing plot lines and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know how his brain works, but it's extraordinary. But that's an aside. All right, so let's take a step back. You identify yourself as a futurist and as a journalist, but when did you first, I guess, realize you're a futurist or have that point where you were interested in the future?
Well, I think I always have been interested in connecting the dots. You see, when I was a very small child, I wanted to be a spy for Her Majesty's Secret Service. I wanted to put the dots together.
James Bondist.
Yes, exactly, right? Yes. Which sounds completely crazy and not connected to this, but it's everything connected to it, because I was always a kid that wanted to piece things together. I was always a girl child that read too widely and too deeply, and was therefore never going to fit into like a kind of corporate job, which I never ended up really having. Although I have been employed, I was employed always by strange, chaotic and crazy maverick entrepreneurs of one. Like, these were the people that I ended up working with because they were my people. So I effectively found mentors instead of like a boss. And where I spent most of my early 20s was in helping to publish and shape economist and political analyst views into investment theses for investors. Oh, wow. So they didn't call themselves futurists, but they were futuring, right? They were envisaging what the world was going to be, where the opportunities and where the threats were going to come from. And this just made so much sense to myself. So I studied economics as my undergrad. I went and pursued extra education in that space, but also developed the futures lens, because the two go together so well. People think they are antithetical, but really futures and economics is the difference between prediction and speculation. And the dance of zooming in and zooming out is where I think you get a more kind of robust understanding of the world in the horizontal. Then of course you got to go for the vertical too, which is that journey through time, which is something you can only develop a sense of perspective in time and space is through travel and through reading. I think reading is the best way to time travel. It's a way to have one-on-one conversations with the dead in their voice, and you can't interrupt them, right? There's very few things that we're able to do there. Archaeology is speculation, but convening with the dead through the stories that they told gives you such a picture of, importantly, what hasn't changed. That also helps you make predictions and inferences about the future. What is fundamental about human nature that was there in the Iliad, that was there in the Bible and the Quran, that is still there today? I mean, you can bet on that. And also what has changed and why, what those patterns are. So I view history very much like a symphony. It's got a rhythm. It's a rhythm that evolves and expands, but there are patterns you can tune into to sort of get a picture as to where the music is leading us next.
I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent, because you mentioned the Iliad, and we have Homer's Odyssey coming, of course, in the form of a Christopher Nolan movie shortly, which will be, it was supposedly, when it was first aired, was 4 hours long, but so that'll be interesting. But I learned something recently. Have you ever heard about the bicameral mind theory?
I have not. Educate me.
No, so this is really, really interesting, is that that you know how we have an internal voice, right? And I only recently learned that about 40% of people don't have this, right? They don't have that internal monologue, right? It's crazy. But it turns out that when you read the Iliad and you read these stories from early history, that humans at that time didn't have an internal monologue. And they would, so the right and left hemisphere of the brains communicated separately. And that's why they would talk about getting a message from the gods or things like this, because it was the right part of the brain trying to communicate with the left part of the brain. This is the bicameral mind theory, that there was actually that early humans had two consciousnesses sort of going on, competing against each other, and that's how they perceived. Instead of the internal monologue, it was they were getting a message from God. Pretty amazing, sort of, to think about how that we take for granted this sort of capability about being able to talk to ourselves in our head, and that's something that humans may not have always had. But that's an aside, anyway.
Well, it's not super an aside, because it's so much of the conversation around the future of AI is like, what's going on inside the box?
Consciousness
And
itself,
the thing
yeah.
is, I don't know what's going on inside your box. You can only ever know yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I'm content with that. Like, I have as much suspicion of your consciousness as I do of AI's, right? So it's outside.
No, it's actually interesting. My partner Julia, it's something that it's the first relationship I've had where I've really had a perception of her perception of the world and how different it can be from mine at certain times. And I mean, it's a well-known trope now, but don't trust your own mind, don't trust what you're thinking, and it's just like, it's so easy to like go down these patterns of thought, and you have this, you're absolutely convinced this is the way it is, and then you find out one piece of information and it's like, well, it's nothing like what you thought it was. So our perception of the world and our own consciousness is certainly fallible. So I wonder whether, or artificial intelligence, because it's sort of a construct of semantics, may be even a more stable representation of consciousness than human consciousness. But that's a
whole different kettle of fish. But I do tend to lean towards the philosophers who understand intelligence as an emergent phenomenon, not just of intelligence itself, not just of information, but also the embodiment. So the actual sort of sensory inputs of growth, of pain, of suffering, which can only be programmed in theory, right? So the idea of a perfect consciousness having to be born and not made, at least in the way we understand it. That's not to say there's not other types of consciousness, but we also tend to be quite arrogant as humans to believe that our version of consciousness is the pinnacle, rather than the fact that it could operate on a very different scale. It doesn't have to be the same thing. We are different in that we are driven by pain, by suffering, by self-inflicted suffering, by wanting and need. We create problems that we don't have. What other species creates a problem? We do that uniquely. And artificial intelligence, why would it do that?
No, I know. It's really interesting. Anthropic had this research piece they did on the emotions that models are showing, that the LLMs are showing, and I'll try and put it out on social for you guys when I get a chance. But really, really interesting to see how emotion expressed through these models, quite complex emotions, to the point where these models will actually, because of a perceived emotion, not go down a certain path of thought. With the reasoning chain, because of an emotional sense. Now, whether that is a programmed response because of emotions that human express and training data, but the fact that emotions can be inherent in large language models, in that way, it's very interesting to think. So,
although I am slightly suspicious of Anthropic's massive push to getting us to believe that the box is alive, because it's certainly within their interests. I'm always highly skeptical as to the actual interests
this
at play.
messaging is starting. Jensen Huang has said we already have AGI. There's just a
But in whose
debate over
interest is it
this.
to get people to believe? My theory about the imminent sort of threat of the singularity is that the more people that believe in sentience, in will,
Yeah.
in coded form, the more easy people are to manipulate.
Yes.
Which is something we should always just pay attention to. Where's the message coming from? You know, is the call coming from inside the house, from inside the
Oh, this is why-
shareholder's office, or is
Yeah,
it coming
yeah.
from the box itself?
No, I do have that issue with regulation of AI because, when you see, whether it's Biden or Trump or Starmer or whoever meeting to discuss AI regulation, who are they meeting with, right? The CEOs of the
You have a
AI
particular
companies.
agenda, an
Yes,
incentive. I
yeah,
mean,
exactly.
if you can convince people that you have a God under your control, which is ironic in and of itself.
Yeah.
I
With a
mean,
small
the
g.
power you
God with
sort
a
of
small g. Yeah.
sort of delegates to yourself is massive. I mean, let us not kid ourselves. Religion, which can be summed up as belief, which is, other words, unfalsifiable trust in something. This falls very much under this category, which has been sort of operating system, very similar to money, but not quite the same thing. The programming code of religion or belief. Belief is the better phrase for that, because I subscribe to the
Right, but it is coding. It is.
kind of belief, but
I
there's
think it's a good way. Yes,
certain amount of credulity floating around that we can deploy in different ways. Of course, you want to attract it towards yourself and your stock, right?
Isn't it interesting? You could think of the great religious texts as massive prompts to
Software, yeah.
create behavioral programming, right?
And very successfully too. So
Oh, yes.
now we can watch a new programming being programmed on us, like being programmed back into our biology, but within our own generation.
It's a
We
very
can watch how that's
philosophical
sort of
conversation. I like it.
coding back.
Yeah. So listen, just before we take a break, I wanted to come back to this concept of work.
Yeah.
So and I normally do this at the end of the conversation, but in terms of your super forecasts for that, how do you see work fitting in society in the post-industrial age? In the AI or the autonomous age. How will we classify work, given it won't be a job in the way you've thought about it historically?
Okay, sure. So first, let's figure out the difference between like a job and a work. I mean, job is salaried. That's one way to look at it. But really, the way I'm defining job is has only an extrinsic reward. So it's purely financial, which means purely artificial, which means fragile and brittle. Whereas work has an inherent intrinsic as well as extrinsic reward. And you can find that intrinsic reward in a monastery doing very menial labor, where there's an intrinsic value that you get, not just the value that you get paid or rewarded by the other, that defines it for me as work. So, of course, the best forms of work have both an intrinsic and an extrinsic component, where you are doing something for yourself, but also doing something for some other, whether it is a planet or a person or whatever it is, for something greater than yourself, which goes beyond selfishness, which makes you valuable to the other. But effectively, what work becomes is something where you are both valued and valuable, which is different the way we see jobs, which is all about price. So there's a difference always between price and value. Price is artificial, it's market manipulated. You can have artificial scarcity, artificial abundance, but value, real value, is that almost that invaluable, unpriceable component, which is where real work lives. This is the work that gives you meaning, whether that work is teaching or caring or growing a garden or building a beautiful cathedral. This is work that has meaning, but also has meaning to others. Yeah. And that's where that work is infinite. That work is not limited, right? Yeah. It's limited only by imagination. If you look at the most valuable contributions, the valuable work our ancestors did, the buildings that inspire awe, the books that encourage thought and conversation today, the families that have been raised. This is very human work, and it's at the intersection not just of creativity. I hate that. I mean, the people like Anthropic, again, not to pick on them too much, or stand up and say, oh no, don't worry, study an arts degree, we'll give you a job. That's cope. That's total cope. If you are doing art for extrinsic reasons only, you have lost already. You've forgotten what art is. Sorry to get off my high horse there, but work is when you combine the two, right? The intrinsic and the extrinsic, where you satisfy maybe a need that doesn't even exist yet. And it's within the ridiculous often too. It's in the really banal, but it's also in the ridiculous. There's a whole spectrum upon which work then lives in that kneeling cone. Everything from a monk sweeping a pavement with precision or tending a sand garden, all the way through to the composers of symphonies and everything in between. So there's so much work to be done. Work is infinite. Work is satisfying the need of self or the need of other, and the want of self and the want of other.
So what's the currency of work in the future? I've
This is a
thought about
different
this,
conversation.
and I think that money itself will lose value.
Yes.
So it's heavily criticized when I write about the end of capitalism because of automation. But I think even Elon Musk talks about it, that money will be useless in the future. But I think, I'd like to think that the currency of the next stage of the human species is intelligence, is applied intelligence, right? That's what AI will give us, and that's what quantum will give us, quantum computing. Give us the ability to expand our understanding of the universe and expand our understandings of ourselves and so forth. But is that too philosophical?
I think it depends on, again, if we're talking to the same definition. Like, money is such a strange thing. From my understanding of money, it's very similar to religion. It's a software layer designed for one specific purpose. I know economists will tell you it's designed as a store of value and all the rest of it. Really, what money is designed as is an allocation mechanism for scarce resources. And it's the allocation mechanism where, at least nominally, your contribution determines your allocation. This is where meritocracy comes from. This is the underlying part of capitalism that, unlike you, I don't think is going to go away. The idea that my contribution needs to be rewarded is one of those ingrained throughout human history, sort of long-lasting things that is a driving force of a successful society. We know we've tried to design societies with different software where meritocracy is written out, or with hypercapitalism like we see now, where meritocracy is replaced by nihilism and sort of sports betting, which also doesn't work. But what gets people to work together and independently? Again, work, that's that intrinsic and extrinsic me and you working together, is the sense of contribution determines allocation, right? And this is where you see this in small tribes, where if you are a great hunter, you will have a greater share of the feast, and no one begrudges that of you because you understand the contribution. We even see this with the tolerance of massive billionaires. If people feel like the billionaire has contributed. Our current crop of billionaires maybe aren't necessarily doing that giving back, that their allocation is not equal to their contribution. Right? Because money as we know it has been corrupted. So what's going to happen is, yes, money as we know it is already broken. It is not tied to the realm of contribution. If you can quantitative ease your currency and use that money to buy up hard assets in someone else's currency, I don't respect your money or you. So money is broken and it will be torn apart. But what we're left with then is status games, which is a much worse currency than money, because money is bad because it can be bad, but it was the best of our bad ideas. Money to me is very similar to democracy. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, but it's one of the best ideas we've had. Can it be challenged? Yes. Should it be stripped away without understanding the function it had? Probably not. What comes after that? A status-based currency is based on your popularity, that's based on your strength, is a state of nature. Currency. That's an awful kind of way of doing things. Social currency is one version to that. But of course, there's other ones too, like literally fame. I don't know if you know this, but I just did a very big youth study in South Africa looking at Generation Z, the 18 to 30-year-olds. And one of the really interesting things... And they all want to be Instagram... Yeah, but it's more than that. So if you look at where they are saving their money and investing, they're investing in themselves, not in the economy, but in themselves in the form of the clothes that they wear, the friends that they see with, the parties that they go to. Why? Because status is now fungible for goods, for access to goods, services, and opportunities, whether it's through brand endorsements or through property or through a better partner who can better support you. This is a very cynical world. And this is where we kind of headed organically. It's not to say it's the only future, but this is the only alternative that has emerged to money that isn't sort of just full-on authoritarian distribution from a central authority, which we know doesn't work super well. In theory, AI could do it better, but who controls the AI? I mean, we just do them this whole sort of reciprocal, we're going on the same road. So our question really is to figure out a different means of allocation of the really scarce resources. What AI will do for us is reduce the amount of things that are truly scarce. This is through increased artificial abundance. This is a good thing, but it can't do it for everything. And our question is going to be to figure out a new allocation game that is fun and fair to play for the really scarce stuff.
Really scarce stuff. All right. So I want to unpack that after the break. But just before we go to the break, we like to do this thing we call the lightning round. So just give me some short, punchy answers, right? So this is it. Welcome to the lightning round, Bronwyn Williams. Okay. So first of all, what's the first instance you remember of being exposed to futurism or science fiction in either media or story?
Oh, I think it was actually a Doctor Who's episode. Like futurism wasn't something that was common in South Africa. Absolutely not. But like that whole idea of sort of Doctor Who's, and then of course got sucked into the Hitchhiker's Guide and the world of Terry Pratchett's. And as far as I'm concerned, Terry Pratchett is the greatest historian, philosopher, and futurist that you can imagine. I know I'm a big Terry stan, but yeah, I think I came there from a slightly different perspective.
Well, that may answer the next question, but is there someone as a futurist or as a mentor you mentioned that was particularly influential in your career as a futurist and journalist?
As a futurist, I've got two British futurists that have been my absolute mentors along this journey. That would be Dr. Ian Pearson and Tracy Follows.
Tracy's great.
A long time running Twitter DM group where I learned most of the things that I hadn't learned from the bookshelf.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, and is there a science fiction story that you're aware of that is representative of the future you most are hopeful for?
Future I'm most hopeful for. Oh wow, that is I think I'd have to go back to the Pratchettian Discworld, where it's a benign chaos. That is my best hope for humanity.
With the AI still sort of looking after as a caretaker.
A benign chaos is my best hope for humanity. My absolute horror is an ordered sterility, which unfortunately I see glimpses of in my daughter's generation all the time, that they would accept that. And that for me would be tragic because you cannot reclaim what you do not remember.
Okay, final question. What do you think is the most important technological innovation in human history?
It's got to be money and or religion. I mean, it's a hard pick.
All right, good. That's it. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to The Futurists. I'll be back with Bronwyn Williams in a moment. Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. Welcome back to The Futurist. I'm your host, Brett King, and this week we are speaking to the author, one of the authors of the book Surviving the AI Apocalypse. What was the subtitle again, Bronwyn?
A Guide for Solutionists.
A Guide for Solutionists. Okay. All right. So in the second half, we talked a little bit about your methodology on the book, but in terms of the forecasting piece and the things that we've talked about, where do you get your inputs and your research for your thinking in this space?
Well, I try to get as little of it as possible from the foresight and futures community. That would be my rule number one. I am, as I said, a great believer in reading the voices of the dead to give you a bit of a sense check and sanity check on what is really new and what is not new, because so often people think about the future, but they're obsessed with the present. They've forgotten that these are not new ideas, they're old ideas, and we know how they play out. So I'm a great believer in going back to the book, reading. I think that's still the best thing we can do. Of course, you can do the audiobook things too, but I don't think your brain connects those dots quite as well as when you're staring at a page. I know reading and writing is still another technology, but it's a technology that seems to have served us quite well. conversations too, and travel. I think that's also really important.
Travel's
So
great.
basically, my philosophy at understanding the future is to have a very good sense of both space and time. So that means both traveling geographically speaking, and you could do this sort of Alain de Botton thing, traveling around your room, imagining places, revisiting places again, sort of,
No,
go
but I mean,
portaling,
I'm very
but
much of
travel through
the.
space and time.
I'm very much of the Anthony Bourdain, Mark Twain view of the world, that travel broadens the mind,
Absolutely.
the more you travel, the less prejudices you have, and
Correct. But
so
it also
forth.
gives you that first person witness account of the time that you're trying to make sense of. I know all too many people who write without ever having read. You need to be a first person witness of the words of the past. The only way to do that is to read first. You can't be a witness to your times unless you've visited the places that you're talking about. You've spoken to the people that you're theorizing about. I mean, you've got all these cultural futurists that do desktop research and run surveys. I mean, you're not going to learn anything from that. You have to see it yourself. I have a first-person account that makes you useful. This makes your perspective unique. This makes you interesting when you're invited on stage or invited to write a book. You've got something new to say because you have a first-person account rather than just relying on hearsay.
I've been thinking more and more recently about, and for any of us who've had some success in writing and developing a career where people sort of listen to us in terms of our opinions, which is a gift for me. It's a luxury, yeah, and it's an honor, a privilege. But I've been sort of thinking about that responsibility and saying, what could I, I don't have an answer yet, but what could I write today that in 100 years people would still enjoy reading? And it's like, I don't know quite what the answer is to that, but it would, like, how do you make something that's timeless? I heard this quote the other day, is that it was a concept of that in the afterlife, that you would have some sort of head-up display in the afterlife of people who still remember you in the, and it's like, how long does it take to get down to zero?
That's very, very Terry Pratchett too. The whole idea that a
Yeah.
man is only dead when his voice is not, when his name is no
Exactly.
longer uttered. Yes.
Exactly, right? So, how long after? And then, anyway, this is, it's getting very esoteric, but all right, so let's get back
Well, not
to.
very. I mean, this my big theory about the future is that if there's one driving force that drives humanity forwards, it's the quest for immortality. I mean, like we know this from the legends of Arthur, but still today, whether that immortality is through, as I
The
say, like
Chinese
deed,
terracotta
seed,
warriors,
creed,
the
or like
Egyptians,
literally like it's shooting yourself up with your son's blood. There are all sorts of, you can spot all sorts of patterns. What we want is that stretch to immortality, whether it's through having children. That's becoming less popular, or through works, which tend to be more brittle, actually, than the sort of DNA sort of legacy of the entirety of life. Like that's been our sort of best shots of it, right?
Yeah,
You created a
exactly.
corporation, you created shareholder value. This is like the most brittle form of legacy.
Yes, have you seen that cartoon?
Or religion, of course. Religion is also a way to live forever.
There's this great cartoon. I've referred to it a few times, but there's a guy sitting with his children around the campfire, and he said, yes, we destroyed the world, but for a moment we created real shareholder value.
No,
anyway,
it's the most human thing though, isn't it?
I know.
We aspire to greatness, but we pursue very, very foolish ends in order to get there.
But so this could be interesting. I thought about this some time ago, and I haven't revisited it for a while, but if we were to create a new stock market, and we're having a different measure rather than the value of the company, but the measure is whether you put more back into the system, whether you create more value for the world than you take out of it. What would corporations and organizations look like?
They'd be very rare. Let's be honest. This was a kind of the thesis in our book that most organizations and most jobs don't add value. And this is my way of kind of dividing the world, trying to make sense of what's going on, that there's like basically three groups of people in any society. You've got your independent class. You basically live off the work of others, whether that was their ancestors that they've inherited, or whether that's through unearned endowments or some form of privilege. Trust fund kids. You're not contributing value, but you're living off value someone else created. but independently so. So you're living off the dead, not off the living. And you've got the dependent classes who in the future will be our UBI life basic package persons who effectively live off the kindness
Government trust
of
kids, right?
strangers, which are government trust kids, but it doesn't work out so well for them, right? It's like you get the basic package, but effectively what you don't get in that deal is dignity. And I can talk to you about that as a South African, because you don't have the intrinsic
you do think
contribution.
UBI is going to happen?
I think it's going to happen, and then it's going to not happen. It's going to be an experiment.
I don't think it'll live
be an
very
experiment
long.
like communism. It's something we're doing it. You like the memes. Oh, we're doing it. We're doing it anyway.
Well,
And then of course there's the people who work together and add value, which is actually a smaller group than you think. And many people who think that they are contributing value are actually just effectively like the pet and kept class of the super rich, right? Who work as luxury servants doing nails or walking dogs. I mean, I know that sounds terrible to say this, but really your job would not exist if someone didn't have too much money.
No, but UBI is trying to fix a problem. And UBI is trying to fix a problem of, if I can't pay you because the robots have taken your job, but you need to still consume to keep the system going, I'll give you a UBI so you keep consuming.
Yeah, it's trying to fix a real problem with that monetary solution. And we are so confused. We so drank so much of the currency Kool-Aid that we think the two are the same thing, and they're fundamentally not.
But consumption itself has a limited life span, right? Because
the way we're doing it, there's real scarcity. There is real scarcity out there. No matter how much artificial abundance we have at certain strata, there are certain things that are finite.
Yeah. Like the number of hours in a day, the number of years that we can exist. Yeah. Which is why longevity is probably the most valuable industry over the next few years. All right, so let's talk about the future and put your future hat on. So let's take us out to the year, I don't know, 2040 or 2050. What do you think the organizing principles of the planet are emerging as, and how has it changed the way human society is coordinated and organized then?
Well, if you're thinking it's sort of 2040, 2050, we'll be right in the middle of our universal basic income / artificial intelligence governance experiment, which many people feel very clever about, because in theory, this is the cybernetic society of the 60s. It's suddenly possible.
Right. We've been talking about it for a while.
People have been very excited about that. And we'll be starting to figure out just how broken that is making us, and how we have not solved for dignity, we have not solved for intrinsic worth, which is so critical for human beings. We'll also be in the middle of the captive human experiment, because what this really means, when you're talking about universal basic income or artificial intelligence governance, that cybernetic society is talking about being in the cage, means fundamentally being unfree. And this is something we're always very willing to do as humans. We'd love to trade away our freedom in exchange for a sense of security, or more importantly, we'd like to trade away our freedom in order to also get rid of our responsibility. This is something we naturally want to do, but it's one of those things that we shouldn't do. Just like we want to eat cake, even though it makes us feel bad later, but we still want to eat cake. What we want to do is get rid of our agency and our responsibility. And you know what? Like I always say, we get the future that we want, and we want that very badly at the moment. We don't want the responsibility. We do want the security. We tasted the starting of insecurity with our jobs going away. We don't like this having to fend for ourselves things one bit. So we're very happy to cede our authority to this supposedly sort of perfect or best case scenario kind of artificial intelligence that will divvy everything up, be the new allocation. Since we don't have money anymore, we can't compete for money without jobs, and our stupid jobs that are already irrelevant today, but nonetheless they made us feel like we were contributing. But that's got to go away, right? So we're going to replace that with this allocation of this perfect system that will tell us how much we can have, that will tell us how many credits we can consume, how much healthcare we consume, all the rest of it. But we're going to start getting
how many
sick of
tokens
it about
on the
by
AI
then.
we get.
Yeah, because we'll understand that our artificial abundance can help us allocate our real scarcity. We're not going to like it super much, because extreme fairness doesn't feel fair. Unfairness actually feels fairer, because unfairness gives us a chance with luck. This is something we can notice today. Look at how young people are turning back to the church and back to sports betting, both of which are...
Are they?
Yes,
I wasn't aware
absolutely.
of that,
I mean, this is something I predicted for quite a long time, that basically when meritocracy stops working, we double down on the new enchantment, which is luck, which is either the gods or fate.
But we don't
And-
really. I mean, this is again something that I don't fully subscribe to. I think the meritocracy argument really doesn't work either, because
endowment's always unfair. Endowment's almost always unfair. But the point that I'm pointing to here is that the casino feels fairer than an actually fair society where everyone gets their please sir, can I have some more bowl of the same bowl of gruel? Even though it is fairer for everyone to live on that aesthetic bowl of gruel, it feels fairer to have a chance. Human beings love a bit of hope. And what we'll find in an artificially fair and allocated society is how hopeless that feels. And we can see this in birth rates, incidentally. Captive mammals do not breed. And that's not how we're thinking about it. What we say is we're not having children because we're not rich enough. Brother and sister, absolutely not. You were much richer than any other generation, I assure you. And I assure you the people much poorer than you have had babies nonetheless. We're not having babies because at some fundamental level, we feel trapped. We don't feel like we can break out of where we are at the moment. I know that's very philosophical, but anyway, at the 2040s, 2050s, we'll probably be at the peak sort of not having babies, captive mammal, understanding of by getting the perfect, we've traded away the imperfect, which is actually what we crave, where we find meaning, where we get beautiful cathedrals, where we get exquisite and totally irrational works of art that make life have meaning. Because I assure you, even as we get better at living longer, by then we will be living longer. A longer life gives you a longer time to contemplate just how pointless your life is unless you are involved in something that has intrinsic meaning.
But this is why we're going to have to be going for much bigger, more audacious goals when we're living longer, because otherwise what's the point?
What's the point? If you're living longer just to go for more oncology appointments every Tuesday afternoon, there's no point.
No.
So we'll be figuring this out. We'll have got a lot of what we wanted, and we'll be figuring out that we want even more.
We want more.
And more doesn't mean more stuff. It means more depth, not more breadth. And we've confused it. At the moment, more means more stuff, more breadth, more of the earth come into my arms, rather than more being more of me giving out.
We'll crave scarcity again. But okay, so what
we'll still crave competition and scarcity, because that's the piece that comes with it.
This is a debate actually that again is not a popular view that I have, but I actually think competition, competing against each other rather than competing for each other, is the core problem in capitalism.
Well, it's like the accelerator and brake in a car. To go forward, you need the stability of both. The whole like evolutionary grist that has got us to where we are, out of the sludge and into, a nice hotel in Moscow. It's this dance between collaboration and competition. You need a bit of both. Healthy competition is where I encourage you to be the best version of yourself possible. And we both end up as that sort of grist in the mill that drives us both forward. Unhealthy competition is where I run over you.
Yes.
Which is very different.
Which is survival of the fittest.
Yes. As opposed to we survive better by actually rubbing each other a bit, by actually grinding each other a little bit, by testing each other. Yeah. And we forget that that's the good sort of competition, like that's the right sort of competition, but it has to be balanced with collaboration. So you need the individuals competing together to bring like individual sort of stress to the group, but healthy stress. Like muscles, you go pull in the gym. You need a bit of stress, a bit of competition, but also the collaboration of the whole organism as to where we headed.
Yeah, I mean, with Artemis 2, just going back to the moon, the Apollo project is a great example of competing.
Yes.
On a large scale with large groups of people
and achieving the impossible through competition.
Exactly.
But not competing to the death.
Not competing as corporations, competing on a mission, competing on
excellence,
expanding human
achieving like
existence.
Greater like times on a runner. It's this, you need a competitor to push you to the limit that you could have got to. That sort of competition that brings joy.
So in the second half of the century, maybe it's when we start building huge cathedrals again, or maybe it
I
is
think
that
it's
we're,
coming.
yeah.
I think by the mid-century we'll have reached peak sterility, both in a literal and a figurative sense, and we'll be craving a bit more of that benign chaos. Understanding the perfect order is a very heavy price to pay when it comes to the futility of life, really, ultimately.
Well, on that note, it might be a good place to finish. So, Bronwyn, thank you for joining us on The Futurist today. How can people find out a bit more about the book and about you and what you're doing in terms of the work as a futurist?
Oh, sure. The book you can find out more at survivetheai.com. You can read you can do the tests and figure out if you can or can't survive the coming job apocalypse. You can also figure out how much of your current profession is total bullshit and how to clean it up. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. I was an early adopter there, so just plain old Bronwyn Williams, quite easy to find. And on most of the regular social platforms, you can also find me in my business, which is Flux Trends, as in flux capacitor, fluxtrends.com, where I do a lot more corporate sort of foresight.
Very good. Well, I was going to do my Doc Brown impression, but Marty! But thank you very much for joining us on The Futurist, and every success.
Thank you very much.
That's it for The Futurist this week. Thank you for joining. It's nice to be back recording, having been on the road and working on Bank 5 the last few weeks. So thank you all for sticking with us. And if you'd like to hear more episodes, check out thefuturist.com. And thanks to the Provoke Media team for helping us put together this episode. You're listening to The Futurist, and as usual, we'll see you next week. In fact, we'll see you in the future.
Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.